So welcome to this live webinar on optimizing plant-based nutrition. So this is part of a series that we're hosting through the Better Base, and tonight we're working in collaboration with a wonderful new charity called Doctors for Nutrition, and they work across Australia and New Zealand to bring nutrition back to healthcare. But Emma's going to tell you a bit more about them because she's one of their ambassadors. And Emma is one of the dietitians who talks about why whole food plant-based is best for our health, and she works at Greenstuff Nutrition, but I'll tell you a bit more about her in a second. So we are going to be your hosts. So I'm a pharmacist by background. My background's mainly in hospital pharmacy, but over the last year I've started working more in community pharmacy. So I'm really keen to help people take charge of their health, prevent disease, and also I'm really passionate about looking after the environment as well. So about 18 months ago, I founded the Better Base, which is a platform to help raise awareness of the benefits of a plant-based lifestyle for our health and also for our planet. So we run events and webinars, and we also help people in terms of learning how to cook this way. So we've got a recipe subscription that I'll tell you a bit more later. And yeah, we just love to collaborate with other people and share their knowledge and help people learn more about this way of living. So that's a little bit about me. And tonight we have the amazing Emma Strutt, who has really kindly donated her time to help us all learn more about whole food plant-based eating. So last month we had the Next Level Health webinar with Dr. Luke Wilson, and if you haven't watched that one, you can find that through our website, and I'd highly recommend going back and having a watch of that because he's got great ways of describing things and talks about 5 foods to eat more of and 5 to eat less of if you're aiming for achieving next level health. We've also got a few other amazing speakers lined up for the next few months. So Aaron Brunet, who's introduced himself, and he's in our audience tonight. He won MasterChef New Zealand a few years back, and he is just a culinary genius. So he's going to be doing a webinar next month, so stay tuned for that one. We've also got the very esteemed Dr. Mike Joy, who's a senior researcher at Victoria University, and he researches the environment and how humans and animals are impacting the environment, particularly looking at our freshwater crises in New Zealand. And he speaks very openly about how we need to reduce the amount of animals on our land to stay within environmental boundaries. So he'll be on a webinar in a couple of months. And then we've also got Ben Eitelberg, who's based in Queensland at the moment, and he is a great endurance athlete and coach. Recently did a 100K ultra marathon, and he's delivering workshops around Australia and New Zealand around plant-based fitness. So these are some of the people who are going to be bringing your way, and hopefully will help to inspire you in different aspects of the plant-based lifestyle, and perhaps you might want to share these with your friends and family so they can join you as well. So tonight we have got, as mentioned, dietitian Emma Strutt, and she's going to be talking about optimizing a plant-based diet. So I'll tell you a bit more about Emma. She's a registered dietitian and nutritionist. She holds a certificate in plant-based nutrition through Cornell University and the T. Colin Campbell Centre for Nutrition Studies, and she's also a qualified yoga teacher. Having followed a plant-based diet for over a decade, Emma passionately advocates for the benefits of plant-based nutrition through her private practice, in addition to a wellbeing and education program that she's developed for members of her local community. As mentioned, she's the Doctors for Nutrition lead dietitian for Queensland, and she's a member of their advisory council. She's also a member of the Dietitians Association of Australia and the Australasian Society of Lifestyle Medicine. What a list. She is a pretty special person. And I was lucky enough to meet Emma when I was in Melbourne recently for the Doctors for Nutrition conference. And she gave this presentation that we're going to hear tonight, and it was amazing. She packed so much in to about 20 to 25 minutes and just gives it so clearly, and it was one of the favourites from the conference. So I knew that we had to ask her to come online and share it with more people that couldn't be there in Melbourne. So already this year has been such a great year for plant-based living already. We had 250 of us gathered in Melbourne. I'm sure that some of you were there. Maybe let us know what your highlight was at the conference if you were there. And then in New Zealand, we hosted Neil Barnard following that Melbourne conference. We had him in Wellington and Auckland giving events. And then recently in Nelson, we had 2 screenings of The Big Fat Lie, which is a Kiwi documentary that's directed by Grant Dixon, who I believe is also in our audience tonight. So maybe say hello if you were at either of those events in Nelson and what you took away from those nights. And it's just been so nice meeting literally hundreds and hundreds of people over the last couple of months. And I look forward to hearing more from you all tonight. So without further ado, I will hand over to Emma, and she's going to speak for about 25 minutes or so, and then I'll come back and we'll have a Q&A discussion. So feel free to post your questions during the talk in the chat box, and I'll take a note of them, and then we'll try and get through as many as we can after Emma talks. So I'm just going to ask Emma to turn on her audio and video, and then I will say goodbye, and I'll see you soon.
Can everyone hear me okay? Maybe. Yes, okay, excellent. All right, thanks Hannah for that lovely introduction. I think I'm blushing with all the kind words that you actually said about me. Before I get started though, I'd just like to say really, really massive thanks to the Better Base and Doctors for Nutrition for co-hosting this webinar today. And thank you all for signing up and logging in. It's really, really exciting to see the growing interest in plant-based lifestyles at the moment. So as Hannah said, the webinar I'm running through today is actually an adapted version of the presentation I gave at the Doctors for Nutrition conference in Melbourne recently. So if you have an interest in evidence-based nutrition or lifestyle medicine, I would highly, highly recommend checking Doctors for Nutrition out. If you haven't heard of them before, they're a new health promotion charity with arms in both Australia and New Zealand. And our mission is to basically bring food and evidence-based nutrition back to healthcare. I couldn't speak more highly of the conference this year. It was absolutely amazing. We had some world-class speakers, including Dr. Scott Stoll and Dr. Barnard come from the US. And they're going to be doing it all again next year as well. So keep your eyes peeled for that. I hope to see some of you there. And if you are interested in getting involved, we would absolutely love your support. So Doctors for Nutrition is across all social media. So after the webinar, make sure you follow it up and show them a bit of love. And I'm not sure on the rules and regulations in New Zealand, but obviously in Australia, any donation over $2 is tax deductible. So we can't do it without you guys. All right, so on to the show. We've now got an overwhelming amount of research that supports the use of a whole food plant-based diet for so many aspects of health, including the prevention and reversal of some of our biggest killers. And it's now firmly established that a plant-based diet isn't only the best diet for us, it's also the healthiest diet for the planet, and it's actually a necessity if we want to achieve the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. So whether you're new to plant-based lifestyles and you've never really heard of this concept before, or whether you've been doing it for a while now, there will be questions that pop up from time to time because this is a big shift away from a standard diet. So today I'll be giving you a relatively express edition on how to optimize plant-based nutrition to ensure that everyone can lead a long and healthy life. So firstly, let's just take a look at some really important statistics. So worldwide, nearly 2 million adults are overweight and obese, and that figure is climbing. So diet-related non-communicable diseases, so that's things like heart disease, cancer, certain diabetes, and the associated risk factors are amongst the leading causes of death. So we all know this. We've heard these statistics so often. I feel like they're actually losing a bit of their meaning and impact. But it is actually really important to take a look at this because we've seen some amazing advancements in medical technology. We've got new drugs that are coming out all of the time. So why are we still sick? Why are we seeing these kinds of statistics? Because for chronic diseases, mainstream medicine is not the ultimate answer. So there is no magic pill here. But the good news is that we're not powerless. So there's actually quite a bit we can do to improve our own health outcomes. The recent Eat Lancet report estimated that by shifting to more plant-based diets, we can actually prevent 11 million premature adult deaths each year. And I think that number would actually be higher if people applied the whole food plant-based diet principles. So it's the food. How do we fare in Australia right now? Not great, actually. It's kind of worrying to see these statistics as a dietitian. So the latest government report, which came out, oh, you've lost sound, have you? Can you guys still hear me? Martin and Liz? Yep. It might just be Martin and Liz, sorry. Oh, very quiet. Okay, well, I'll speak up. I'll hold the microphone up. Is that a little better? Okay, all right, we'll see how we go. Okay, so I was just saying the latest government report that came out late last year indicates that between 90 to 99% of us aren't eating enough veggies. Nearly 4 in 5 adults aren't eating enough fruit, and 1/3 of our calories are actually coming from discretionary food, which is just a fancy term for junk food. For teens, though, it's even worse. So they're getting 41% of their calories from junk. We're eating too much fat, too much salt, and too much sugar. And for older Australians, alcohol is a little bit of a problem. Every man and his dog seems to be worried about protein on a plant-based diet. I'd actually be more worried about where fibre comes from on a typical Aussie diet. So we know how important high fibre diets are for managing and preventing chronic disease, yet less than 20% of adults are actually meeting the suggested dietary target for fibre. What about our cousins across the ditch? So Kiwis actually have their bar set a little lower here. I was surprised to see that the government recommendations for veggies are only 3 or more serves per day, whereas in Australia it's 5. And 64% of you are achieving this. 57% are eating enough fruit. But of those that are eating enough of both, it's actually less than half, so 41%. And of course, certain subsets of the population are more at risk of unhealthy eating patterns. So what is an optimal diet? Well, it has to meet all essential nutritional requirements while maximizing well-being. So it needs to reduce your risk of chronic disease and support a healthy body weight, because we know overweight and obesity are strongly linked to some of our biggest killers. It has to be sustainable and ethical. So there's no such thing as a healthy human on a planet that is dying or dead. So an environmentally friendly diet is a must. And it needs to be diverse, it needs to be satisfying so it keeps a person interested, and it needs to be culturally and socially appropriate so someone can stick to this way of eating long term. And the good news is that most of this will take care of itself when you follow a whole food plant-based diet. So how does a plant-based diet help? Well, there's a huge number of ways that are health promoting when you eat this way. For the sake of time, I'm not going to run through everything that's listed here on the slide, but basically, by following a whole food plant-based diet, a person reduces their intake of compounds and foods that are disease-forming, including some that are known carcinogens, and you increase your intake of beneficial nutrients, of phytochemicals and antioxidants, and all of this results in improved biomarkers and a lower risk of certain chronic diseases. But there is a caveat. So there has been a real boom in vegan food over the last few years, which is fantastic from an environmental and ethical perspective. And I hate to say it, but as far as health outcomes go, many of these foods are just as bad as the animal-based equivalent, if not worse. So this was actually a really interesting study that looked at the various ways of plant-based eating and the hazard ratio for heart disease. And I'd just like to draw your eye to graph B here. So that dotted yellow line that's tracking down, that's healthy plant foods. So as expected, that decreases the likelihood of heart disease occurring. But if you have a look at those two lines that are tracking up, so that solid red line is animal food, so increased likelihood, that's to be expected. But that dashed line above it, that's actually unhealthy plant food. So all of this refined, processed, junky kind of vegan food. So while both the animal foods and unhealthy plant foods were detrimental, the junky vegan stuff was actually worse. So you want to eat a good variety of whole foods from each of the core food groups. And if you do this, your health outcomes are going to be fantastic and individual nutrients won't be too much of a concern. But the more of these types of foods that start to sneak into your diet, then you will start to run the risk of certain nutrient deficiencies. So the keen eye would have spotted extra virgin olive oil on my previous slide. This has long been promoted as a health food, but in my mind, oil is akin to sugar. So it's an incredibly processed product where all of the fiber and all of the beneficial nutrients have been stripped away. And what you're left with is something that's incredibly calorie dense. So there's about 120 calories per tablespoon. So it's not great as far as weight loss is concerned. And it can actually impair endothelial function. You can see here that it rates very, very poorly on the Andy Nutrient Density Index. It's coming in at almost the last place. So it's not a nutrient-rich food. But what about the polyphenols? So everyone's heard that olive oil is a good source of polyphenols, right? Well, if we take a closer look, it does make the top 100. I will give it that. But have a look where it ranks. So it ranks 67th on the list with only 10 milligrams of polyphenols per serve. So to put that into perspective, that's more than 20 positions lower than chocolate milk. So a good source of polyphenols, perhaps not. Good marketing though, definitely yes. So we've just covered what to minimize in the diet. Now let's talk about the good stuff, what to include. I'll run you through what I call a plant-based high five. So what it includes is 1 serve of flax or chia seeds per day, 2 or more serves of legumes or a soy product like tofu or tempeh, 3 serves of fruit, making sure you're including plenty of veggies here, 4 serves of whole grains, and at least 5 serves of veggies, making sure you're including plenty of leafy greens. And very importantly, not forgetting a vitamin B12 supplement. So low levels of B12 can cause anemia. In extreme cases, it can actually result in irreversible nerve damage. So don't muck around with this. Take your B12. The only reliable source of B12 on a strict plant-based diet, at least in Western countries where food hygiene laws are quite regulated, are fortified foods or supplements. So firstly, why flax or chia? Well, to explain this, I need to take just a small step back and first talk to you about omega-3 fatty acids. So there are 3 omega-3 fatty acids to be aware of. There's ALA, EPA, and DHA. So ALA is a short chain fatty acid that our body can't actually make on its own, so we need to eat it in food. EPA and DHA are longer chain fatty acids, and our body can actually convert ALA into EPA and then EPA into DHA. And our body uses all 3. Conversion rates can vary greatly, and there's a few dietary factors that can interfere. So saturated fats, trans fats, oleic acid, which is found in high amounts in that U-bute olive oil, and omega-6 fatty acids can all reduce conversion of omega-3. So it's rich in omega-6s, have the potential to be pro-inflammatory, whereas omega-3s are promoted as anti-inflammatory. And you can see here in figure 2, omega-3s and omega-6s actually share a very, very similar metabolic pathway. So if you consume too much omega-6, you can actually overwhelm the system, so to speak, and you can reduce your omega-3 conversion by up to 40%. So basically, this means that we need to keep our diet reasonably low in fat and include a serve of flax or chia seeds each day, as these are 2 of the most potent sources of ALA a person can eat. So just make sure that you grind them up before you're eating them, otherwise you're not going to digest everything properly. And once they are ground, keep them in the fridge or the freezer, as omega-3s tend to go rancid in the heat. So next up, 2 or more serves of legumes. So we can't talk about optimal diets without briefly mentioning the blue zones. So blue zones refer to the 5 regions of the world where residents are most likely to live to 100. And these people tend to be incredibly healthy, so they're not suffering their chronic diseases at the rates we are in Western societies. They're gardening, they're walking to the market, they're chopping wood well into their 80s and 90s. So there's 5 blue zones in the world. There's 2 in the Mediterranean, 1 in Japan, another in Central America, and then there's the Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda. So 5 different communities, but they do share some similarities. So all of them follow a predominantly plant-based diet, and all of them consume legumes. So legumes are actually seen as the cornerstone of every longevity diet in the world, and they're actually the only statistically significant food indicator of longevity. So while legumes are low in calories, they're really high in fiber, they're a great source of protein, prebiotics, and complex carbohydrates, meaning they are slowly digested and they're going to give a feeling of satiety. So beans are going to be your best friend when it comes to weight loss. And they're also full of iron, zinc, and they're a pretty reasonable source of calcium too. So you want to include some legumes each day. Next up is fruit. So fruit's sweet, it's colourful, it's packed with antioxidants, it's damn delicious, but unfortunately it's often avoided by people because of their sugar content. Fruit is not something that should be feared, it should actually be enjoyed every day. What about diabetics though? So I have one particular doctor that's always referring his diabetic patients to me, and they come with strict instructions to minimize fruit. Well, this recent study actually tracked 500,000 people over 7 years. What did it find? It actually found that higher fresh fruit consumption was associated with significantly lower risk of developing diabetes in the first place. And for those that already had it, improved insulin sensitivity, lower risk of death and development of major vascular complications. So the take-home message here is eat your fruit. Next up is whole grains. So the message here is just select your carbs with care. So while it is true that refined grains can be detrimental to your health, the exact opposite is true when it comes to whole grains. When you refine a grain, you actually remove the bran and the germ layer, and as you can see, that's where all the beneficial nutrients are. Whole grains are still filled with fiber, with the vitamins, with the minerals and the phytochemicals, so they're very, very healthy for you. This was a massive systematic review that came out earlier this year. It reviewed about 135 million human years of data. What did it find? So the findings suggest a 15 to 30% decrease in all-cause and cardiovascular related mortality, reduced risk of heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, and colorectal cancer when comparing the highest dietary fiber consumers with the lowest. So plant foods, including whole grains, are carbohydrate-rich foods, and that's where you're going to find your fiber. So please do not fear carbs. If we look at whole grains specifically though, this systematic review found that whole grain consumption was associated with reduced risk of all-cause mortality, chronic diseases like heart disease and diabetes, respiratory cancer, hormone cancers, GI cancers, and a decreased risk of respiratory disease. So wherever you can, try to choose intact whole grains, but if you're having slightly more processed products like breads and pasta, the magic carb to fiber ratio seems to be about 4 to 1. So that means for every 4 grams of carbs, there should be at least 1 gram of fiber. So it's really important to start checking those labels. And lastly, veggies. So the World Health Organization estimated that 6.7 million deaths were attributed to inadequate fruit and veg intake in 2010 alone. So vegetables basically give you your best nutritional bang for your buck. Leafy greens and cruciferous veg are especially good for you here. They're full of iron, they're a good source of calcium, and they're also packed with something called nitrates, which are fantastic for cardiovascular health. To really optimize your diet, though, you want to be thinking color and you want to be thinking variety, because that's going to maximize your phytochemical and antioxidant intake. And it is really very cliche, but we do want to eat a rainbow each day. So the pigments that give food their beautiful bright colors, they also provide us with protective components as well. And all of the benefits are slightly different depending on the color. So that's my little plant-based high five. I'll just now quickly cover some of the common questions I get asked. So the most common question would have to be, where do you get your protein from on a plant-based diet? Well, the shocking news is that all plants have protein, even fruit has protein. Now, I'm not trying to undersell the importance of protein in the body, but a little bit of common sense here goes a long way. If we have a look at what protein actually is, proteins are made up of 20 amino acids. Over half are non-essential, meaning the body can actually make it by itself, but 9 are considered essential, meaning that we have to eat them in our diet. 2 are worth a very, very brief mention on a plant-based diet, and they're lysine and methionine. So certain plant foods don't contain large amounts of these particular amino acids, but I stress if you're eating adequate calories and a good variety of food over the course of the day, this is not going to be an issue for you. For example, legumes are high in lysine, but they're low in methionine, whereas grains are the other way around. So how much protein do we actually need? Well, the average female needs about 46 grams per day. The average male a little bit more at 64 grams. But the good news is we're all getting more than this anyway. So this study pulled all the data from the Adventist Health Research, and it found that the median intake of protein on a vegan diet was actually 71 grams per day. So eat your beans, eat your grains, eat your fruit and your veggies, and you're going to be fine as far as protein is concerned. The next question is usually about iron. So there are 2 forms of iron that we need to be aware of. There's non-heme and heme iron. So heme iron is more bioavailable to the body, and that's only found in animal foods, whereas non-heme iron is the type of iron that's found in plant foods. Now, by no means do we actually need to consume heme iron to be healthy. In fact, the intake of heme iron and iron overload has been associated with several disease processes. But it does pay to educate yourself a little bit of the ins and outs of plant-based iron. So how much do we need? The RDI in Australia is 18 milligrams for female adults and 8 milligrams for men and women who have gone through menopause. There are some studies that suggest vegans and vegetarians need to consume a fair bit more than this to account for the reduced bioavailability, but it looks like those studies are actually modelled on worst case scenarios. And we know that iron is highly conserved by the body, meaning those with lower stores or higher physiological need will actually absorb more and excrete less than others that don't have the need for it. I think it's very important to point out here that eating a varied plant-based diet will put you at no greater risk of iron deficiency anemia than omnivores. But there are things to be aware of, especially if you're a female, if you're pregnant, or if you're an athlete. So there are certain compounds that inhibit the absorption of iron. They include phytic acid, so phytates, polyphenols, especially the polyphenols tannins found in tea, and to a lesser degree, calcium can also inhibit iron absorption. So to overcome this, just make sure you're cooking your grains and your beans really well. That's going to help reduce the phytic acid load. You can also sprout things, ferment things. That's going to reduce the phytic acid load as well. Don't have tea or coffee around mealtime, so you want to make sure you're having them at least an hour either side of your meals. And if your iron levels are already marginal, I'd avoid calcium fortified plant milks around your mealtime as well. So things you can do to enhance absorption is add some vitamin C at that meal. So this can actually increase your iron absorption by up to 12-fold, and it reduces the effect of the phytic acids and the tannins. So vitamin C is really, really abundant in plant foods, but excellent sources include kiwi fruit, strawberries, citrus obviously, and veggies, veggie-wise, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and red capsicum. So for iron, you want to be thinking beans, greens, and grains, but any protein-rich food is going to have a good amount, like your soy products or your nuts and your seeds. And then finally, I'd like to just briefly cover calcium. So calcium is important for neuromuscular and cardiac functioning because it's an electrolyte, but it's also really important for strong bones and teeth. So having a low calcium intake has actually been associated with an increased risk of osteoporosis, but there's a whole bunch of other important factors that come into play here, like vitamin D and exercise. And how much calcium we need is actually a little bit debatable. So in Australia, the RDI is between 1,000 to 1,300 milligrams for adults, depending on what age group you fall into. But there have been some studies that suggest this might be a little bit of an overkill. In the UK, for example, the recommendations there are only 700 milligrams. And I'm not sure if anyone's heard of Dr. Walter Willett before, but he's a prolific nutrition researcher at Harvard. And he suggests that 500 to 700 milligrams is enough for most people as long as there's adequate vitamin D. And there isn't much evidence to suggest that consuming amounts higher than this actually prevent fractures. Other factors to consider for strong bones includes going easy on the caffeine. So too much caffeine can decrease the amount of calcium in your body stores. So you don't really want to be having more than 4 cups of coffee a day. Too much salt in the diet can reduce bone density, and more than 2 alcoholic drinks per day increases your risk of osteoporosis. And of course, weight-bearing activities and balancing activities to prevent your risk of falling are actually really important here as well. So good sources of calcium include your low oxalate leafy greens, your legumes, calcium set tofu and fortified plant milks, but absorption really matters a lot as well. So other veggies like spinach and Swiss chard, they're actually really high in calcium, but they're also high in a compound called oxalic acid. Um, and because of that, they actually block the absorption of the calcium that's in those foods. Whereas your low oxalate greens, so things like your broccoli, your kale, bok choy, pak choy, that kind of thing, they're actually fantastic. They're even more bioavailable to us than the calcium in dairy. So just to close, some considerations for practice for any of the health professionals that might be tuning in. I know of a few doctors who actually know the incredible benefits of a plant-based diet, yet still don't discuss it with their patients. They think that this way of eating is too extreme and that patients will never stick with it. Please give them a chance to prove you wrong. So I work in a small rural community. It's built off the back of dairy and beef cattle, and I'm always surprised who actually takes this on board. So always give them the option to make informed choices on the best available evidence. Don't take that decision away from them. Let them make it themselves. Don't you make it for them. Provide resources and handouts at consultations. Those of us who've been eating this way for years, we know how easy it is. It's the new norm. And you sometimes forget just how confronting this change can be for some people. So have some resources on hand. That's going to be a really, really big help. Refer to a dietitian with a good source, a good knowledge of plant-based nutrition. I know how time poor doctors are, so if you have this facility available to you, please utilize it because it will give patients a good opportunity to discuss their dietary factors. And remember the importance of vitamin B12. So this little vitamin is critical for overall health. And now just some tips for everyone. Firstly, find your community. So this way of eating isn't the norm yet. I hope we're going to change that. But it can get a little bit lonely at times, especially for people who are just starting off with this way of eating. So finding a support network and surrounding yourself with like-minded people is really, really important. Even if it's only online, this makes it a lot easier to make that transition, and it's also really important for accountability and making habits stick. Learn how to read labels, so it's crucially important to have an understanding of what's actually going into your body. When you're shopping, stick mainly to the outside of the supermarket because that's where you're going to find all of your fresh produce and you're going to be less likely to be tempted by anything that's lurking in the middle aisles. And finally, don't shop while you're hungry. So people who do this tend to over purchase, and they're usually more likely to buy the wrong kinds of food. So all bets are off when you shop when you're hungry. So to close, every time we eat or drink, we have the opportunity to fight disease processes or feed them. There's no such thing as a magic pill, but the good news is we have the next best thing, and it's the best thing for our health. It's also the best thing for the planet. And the beautiful thing is it's never too late to start on this journey. So that's pretty much it for me. That's plant-based nutrition in a nutshell. So I'll open it up to you guys for questions now.
Thank you so much for that, Emma. I learned even more this time than I think I did the first time. There's so much packed in there, and you just say it all so clearly. And I think it's so nice for us to just see all of the evidence behind this way of eating and reassuring us that we can get everything we need from a plant-based diet, and that this is really a way that we can help to look after the planet at the same time, which is so important. And I also like how you reiterate the importance of B12 as well. Which is great. So, I think we have skipped through our slides too far. Let me get back on the right one. Sorry. No, that's all right. Okay, we've got plenty of questions coming through, and we did have one asked in advance, so I think I'll start off with that one. So we had somebody ask about how strict we need to be to get the benefits of a plant-based diet. So if we're thinking about how great all of these things are that you mentioned in the high five, do we need to eat this way all of the time? Or can we slip up every now and then and have one of the vegan magnums that you mentioned?
Well, firstly, I think it's really important to not be too hard on yourself, because that can actually result in self-sabotage along the line. But healthy eating and your health, it's a spectrum. So it kind of depends on your starting point. So if you're a young, 20-year-old who's never had a health issue in their life before, and you're following a pretty bang-on diet most of the time, then you probably could sneak in a few of these foods from time to time. But that being said, if you're a 40, 50, 60-year-old and you've already got the development of atherosclerosis or diabetes or rheumatoid arthritis, then you really do need to be a lot more strict with your diet there. And I think it's actually important to note that a lot of these chronic health conditions, they don't just happen. So they take years, decades to develop. So you really want to be laying the foundations of healthy eating as soon as you possibly can. And moderation tends to be a slippery slope for a lot of people, because what's moderate to me might not be for you. And once you start to add things in small amounts, oftentimes, especially if there's any food addiction issues, etc., over time that becomes more and more and more. So I don't have a definite black and white answer for this. I think there's multiple shades of grey there, and there's no evidence to draw on for this specific question. But I think personally what I do is I make my diet as on point as I possibly can whenever I possibly can. But say if I am traveling or if I'm eating out and I can't find a meal that's no oil, so it might have a little bit of oil or a little bit of processed vegan food in it, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it, basically.
Great. Good answer. And I'd just like to touch on the point that you mentioned about the chronic diseases, and there's been a few questions coming up related to people who may be taking medicines for particular things or be experiencing certain diseases. And I just want to reiterate to have a chat with your health professional before you make any big changes. This information is educational, and for most people, most of the time, we can encourage this, but do have a chat with your health professionals. And it's also important to try and find a health professional that will support you with the decisions that you want to make about your lifestyle. And Emma, you mentioned that a lot of doctors don't talk to their patients about this, or perhaps they haven't heard about plant-based nutrition. So if they are open to learning about it, then there's plenty of good resources like the PCRM website that they could learn more about this. Or there are people like Dr. Luke Wilson who can offer online consultations, and he's one of the Doctors for Nutrition ambassadors. So if there's anyone out there that would like to have more of a one-to-one conversation, then I definitely encourage those sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And
So
just quick note on that, actually, like all of the information in this talk was just generalized. So
yeah,
obviously different people will have different needs. So yeah, definitely talk to your health professional for that.
yeah. Awesome. And hopefully we'll end up with a lot more health professionals knowledgeable in this area. And I'm really glad to see a lot of people on the webinar today who are both practicing health professionals or students, which is really exciting to see. So if you could share this webinar with as many of your colleagues and your class as possible, then we can hopefully make this shift happen faster. And someone's asked, will this be available to watch again? Yes, it will. So we'll email out the link in a couple of days' time, and also share it on social media so we can spread that far and wide, which will be great. And I've also been taking a list of the questions, so the one about salt is definitely noted. But the next one that we're going to touch on is from Rebecca, and she's asking about whether you've got any suggestions of family meals that the kids will like. And she's finding that she's relying a bit too much on the processed vegetarian options.
Yeah. Well, to start with, I think it's actually really important to get the kids involved in cooking wherever you possibly can. Even if you've got room to grow some veggies in the garden, that's all going to make it a greater chance that they're actually going to eat it when it's been put on the table. As far as foods go for kids, their taste buds are a lot more sensitive to salt, to sweetness, and they really don't like bitter foods. From an evolutionary point of view, that's going to stop them from, eating the poisonous berry. So don't rely too much on, really well cooked cruciferous veg or uh, vegetables that have just been boiled, so there's no nutrition left in them. You know that taste change that happens when you overcook a vegetable? Kids really aren't going to like that. So easy whole food plant-based meals that are kid friendly would be like bean burritos or chickpea curry or a stew. Um, Even, something as simple as a salad sandwich with a bit of hummus. It doesn't have to be difficult, and you don't have to spend hours in the kitchen. Um, but there's also some really, really great resources that you can have a look through. So Forks Over Knives, nutritionstudies.org, they have some really fantastic recipes that you can have a look through. I often win kids over in my consults with these blender muffins. I make them out of chickpeas and bananas and peanut butter. And they love that. So if you find that they're having trouble sneaking beans in, blending them up so they don't actually know that they're in there is a good way to go.
Great ideas there. And we'll be sharing a really yummy spaghetti bolognese recipe in a couple of weeks that I'm going to be using at a cooking workshop coming up soon. So keep an eye out for that one. I think the kids will enjoy that. Staying on the theme of children and pregnancy, Chloe had a question about what would your advice be to mums who have issues with breast milk supply, and what might you advise that they supplement with, if anything?
Oh, that's a little bit out of my scope, to be honest.
Yeah.
Um, I wouldn't feel confident giving you a definite answer on that one. If you wanted to talk to, I don't even know if that would be a dietitian related question, to be honest, firstly. But Amanda Benham, she's based in Brisbane also, and she's a whole food plant based practitioner, and she's done specific training in pediatrics. So I'd probably refer you on to her, to be honest. I'm sorry I'm not much help on that.
Great. There's also a podcast called Nutrition Rounds, and that's by Dr. Danielle Ballado, and she's got a whole podcast about pregnancy and breastfeeding and raising children plant-based. So have a look for that one. It's called Nutrition Rounds. Um, what about babies and young children? Any comments on whether it's healthy for them to eat a plant-based diet and how you would cater for B12 for this
Yeah.
age group?
Yep. So this way of eating is healthy for all age groups as long as it's well planned. When they're younger, they're obviously doing a lot more growing, so they're going to need to eat more calorie-dense foods than an adult would. So including more soy-based products, which are more calorie-dense than your beans and your legumes, would be a really good strategy to ensure adequate nutrition, and also including more calorie-dense foods like your nuts and your nut butters. So I'd be including those as well because all of that fiber, it's so beneficial for us, but it can overwhelm little tummies sometimes. So
Yeah.
just making small tweaks to make it more appropriate for them. And B12, so if you're still breastfeeding, the B12 will kind of take care of itself as long as the mother is supplementing. But once, there's no longer any breast milk in the conversation there, you need to start supplementing them or making sure that they have regular fortified foods. So because B12 is a water-soluble vitamin, there's no upper limit set. You're not going to run the risk of giving them too much, so don't stress on that. So as long as they're getting there's actually a few good vegan supplements for children that you can get with appropriate B12 amounts.
Great. And you touched on peanut butter, and Sandra was asking, is it not too high in fat? So maybe thinking back to adults now, would you recommend that that's all right to include as part of a healthy diet? And
Yeah.
I have to confess that I do have a soft spot for peanut butter, especially coming from Nelson, where Pix peanut butter is created. So.
I've got a soft spot for it too. I think a lot of people do.
But I hope that doesn't bias your answer.
Well, that actually might be part of the issue, to be honest. Peanut butter can be quite easily overconsumed. So again, it comes back to if you've got any kind of addictive tendencies around your food. If you're one of those amazing people that can just have a small teaspoon and stop at that, then, every now and then that's going to be fine. It shouldn't play a main role in your diet. Nuts and seeds should always be seen as, like the cherry on top, and they are optional for some people who are dealing with heart disease, or if they're needing to keep their fat really low because they're dealing with MS or rheumatoid arthritis, then I'd probably avoid that. But for people who are just generally healthy and they're following a whole food plant-based diet, then you can include small amounts of nuts and seeds. But if you think that you're going to overdo it, like I know personally, I wouldn't be able to stop at one small scrape. I'd be probably sticking it on the spoon and sticking it in my mouth, to be honest. So I'm quite mindful of that.
Yeah, good answer. So regarding flaxseed and chia seeds, do they need to be ground up to get the omega benefit from them? And also, if you forget to eat it every day, can we say eat double every second day?
Well, I suppose you could. There has been just a few studies regarding too much ALA, so that's a plant-based omega-3, and potentially having detriments for eye health if you're having massive amounts. But if you're just doubling your dose up the next day because you skipped it one day, that's going to be perfectly fine. But it does need to be ground up. So the flax seeds are quite, they're quite hard. So if you don't grind them up first before you eat them, they're going to pass through your GI system undigested. They'll be great for fiber, so great for helping you go to the loo, but they're going to be coming out basically the same way they went in. And chia, actually, you will absorb more if you grind them up as well.
Okay, lovely. Grant is asking about wine. What would you recommend about alcohol, whether we can consume that in moderation? And he's asking, is it a class 1 carcinogen?
Well, yes, it is. It's a class 1 carcinogen, so it's something that is known to cause cancer in humans. I don't know the exact science on the dose-response relationship there, but it's not really something that I include personally. I know some people who do follow a whole food plant-based diet and they include it from time to time. This is quite similar to the first question we had, I suppose, like how often can you actually include these things? Personally, I don't, because Grant's right, it's a class 1 carcinogen. But it depends on your personal preferences, I suppose, on how healthy you want to be on that spectrum.
Yeah, great. And I think there's an increasing trend and more people moving away from alcohol, which is really cool to see, and lots more non-alcoholic alternatives coming out. I guess it's another thing to watch out for what they've added into those as well. So we've got one from Katie asking about that she's read how our body has a difficult time converting plant-based omega-3 into its usable version. Should we combine it with any other foods to help with absorption or conversion?
So it's not about really combining it with things to help conversion. It's about avoiding certain things that hinder conversion rates. So we kind of ran through that a little bit, but it will also depend on your sex. So men tend to convert less than females do. So a young female will have a much higher conversion rate than an older male. There are certain periods in your life where I would recommend an additional supplement as well. So if you're pregnant or if you're breastfeeding, and potentially older individuals, especially if their diet's not on point, then I'd probably back it up with a long chain algae based source of omega-3. But I don't think that's necessary for everyone.
Okay. One of the other questions that came through was about the algae. So, do you recommend it? And you mentioned maybe not for everyone, but what groups might you advocate an algae supplement for?
Yeah. So omega-3s are really important for brain function. So when you're growing a baby, you're laying down lots of neural pathways. So it's really important to make sure you're getting enough omega-3 there. Um, if you're only taking it while you're pregnant or breastfeeding, you're not really taking it for a long time. So I don't think there's going to be a risk of any adverse health effects from taking it. The science is still a little bit murky on whether we actually do need the supplements or not. So we know that vegans and vegetarians tend to have lower amounts of DHA and EPA in our bodies, but whether that's actually a concern is still a little bit up in the air. It doesn't seem to be, but when you're definitely growing a human, then I would err on the side of caution and I would take the supplement. If you're traveling for an extended period of time, say you're overseas for a couple of years and you know your diet's going to be pretty rubbish and you won't have access to chia or flax or hemp or walnuts, then yes, I would supplement. But most people, I wouldn't just guess and add a supplement in, regardless of what it is, whether it's omega-3 or vitamin D or iron or whatever. I would test.
So, maybe we'll have one more question, and I'm sorry if we didn't get around to answering all of these, but we can try and touch on some of them on social media in coming days.
Absolutely.
So I think you answered the question about best protein sources during your presentation, which was good. Someone has asked about salt alternatives. So a lot of people, before they start moving to a healthier diet, might be adding a lot of salt. So do you have any tips on how we can make our food still taste good and replace the salt?
Okay. So there's two ways you can go here. You can either go cold turkey and cut out all the salt all at once. Food's going to taste pretty bland. I'm not going to lie, it's going to taste bland for about 2 to 3 weeks. Your taste buds do adapt though, and you get used to what you're eating. So, for example, like when I used to eat canned baked beans, I used to just buy the normal baked beans. And when I first had the salt reduced one, it tasted disgusting to me. But now I wouldn't be able to have the normal one because it would be too salty. So that's the first point. Your taste buds will eventually get used to it. But besides that, it's about adding other flavor to your food. So make use of your different vinegars, really make use of your herbs and your spices to really amp up the flavors there. And that's going to go a long way to still making your food taste interesting. But there's really no way of getting around it. There will be a couple of weeks transition where your taste buds are readapting to what you're eating.
Yeah, definitely. Great. Thank you so much. I think we're going to have to wrap up the Q&A discussion there, and I hope we got through most of the questions and that you all found it useful. So I'm just going to go back to the slides here, and we've got a couple to finish up on. We'll be done in a couple of minutes. So upcoming events. So most of these are New Zealand based, but if you do know of any Australian food plant-based events coming up, then let me know and I can share them via our Better Base Facebook page and emails. So we've got a Next Level Health seminar in Wellington at the Wellworks Pharmacy. So Dr. Luke Wilson is going to be delivering that. We've got a cooking class in Nelson coming up with a GP called Taisia Chek. The Big Fat Lie premiere is happening in Wellington in April. I'll be talking at a pharmacy about more than medicines and how we can use lifestyle alongside our medicines. And then Tauranga is going to be getting the Big Fat Lie. And then next month, Aaron Brunei, who I mentioned, he won MasterChef, he's going to be doing a webinar just like this one and giving a presentation on how we can cook with really interesting tastes and flavors. And I'm sure he'll have some more tips on how to get over those salty cravings as well. So if you want to be cooking more healthy whole plant foods, then you could check out the free trial of the Ridiculously Good Recipes. So that's a program that I've created, and there's 12 weeks of whole food plant-based meals, and they introduce all sorts of different vegetables, grains, legumes, and just take the hassle out of all of that. So if you wanted to get half price and get the program, it's less than $3 a week. So just use that webinar 50 code at the checkout. And go to thebetterbase.com to access that. These again are the people who will be doing the next few webinars with me. So we've got Aaron, and then we've got Dr. Mike Joy. He'll be speaking about the future of food from an environmental perspective, and then we'll be with Ben Eichelberg around plant-based fitness. So until then, you can check out our website. So Emma's at Greenstuff Nutrition. I'm at the Better Base, and we've got Facebook and Instagram accounts. You can also follow Doctors for Nutrition on all of the above. And if you wanted to support Doctors for Nutrition, then as Emma mentioned, you can make regular donations, however small, and that will help to bring more events and share this message even further. So thank you very much, Emma, for being our wonderful presenter. And I think on behalf of everyone here, we had about 50 people logging on, that everyone would have learned a huge amount. And it's just really cool to see all the enthusiasm coming through the conversation. So yeah, there's a real desire out there for people to be accessing good, credible information and then putting that into practice in our everyday lives. So thank you, Emma.
Thank you for having me, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you very much for everyone that came. And if you have any comments or questions following this, then feel free to just email either one of us, and I'm sure we'd be happy to help.